See, the thing about me putting the camera like this is you can now see what I have to do every single video. I am currently petting Chopper, because I gotta keep doing this in every single video that I film when I'm sitting down here. G'day folks, Wren here, and it's time to talk about the real queers. So by real queers, I just mean let's talk about some non-fiction. So we're in for another Five Friday video filled with non-fiction about queer people and their experiences. So the first book I'm going to talk about today is How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. So I read this a few years ago for the Queer Lit Readathon, and I had no idea what this was about. I went into it just wanting to fulfill a prompt, and it turned out to be like one of my favorite reads in that round. It was phenomenal. Like, you can tell that the author was a poet because of how well written it was. It made you feel things like so much. So this is obviously about Saeed's life and about him being black and gay and a poet and just trying to live his life when the world doesn't seem to want him to. You know, he went through some really tough times, but it was always like he always got through it, but it wasn't in a, you know, you can do it type way. It was so realistic in the way that he dealt with things and all of the troubles in his life. I mean, like, obviously it was realistic. We're talking about non-fiction here. There are some non-fictions where it's like their point is to be motivational, and this wasn't that. It had some really inspiring messages, but that wasn't the point. The point was to detail this person's struggle in their life and just show through all of that that they overcame it. I want to read out some of my review from them, because like I used to be so good at writing reviews. Nowadays I'm just like, was good, please read. It was heartbreaking to read about the author's depression and his experience with racism and homophobia. There was no big happy ending or philosophical meaning to be taken from this book, but that's real life. Real life is hard and gritty, and the sun doesn't always shine, but through it all we will always have our pride. But yes, I highly recommend this book. It was really captivating to read about Saeed's life and his journey, and as soon as I finished reading it, I just immediately wanted to pick up all of his poetry books. So number 2 is going to be The 57 Bus by Dashka Slater. Oh my gosh, also pretty sure I read this for a Queer Lit Readathon. This book, it hit me because I really related to the main person that this is talking about. It's not an autobiography. It is a story about an incident that happened on a bus where a queer person was the victim of a hate crime, and it's detailing that, how that happened, what led up to it, what happened during it, what happened after, and it goes from both sides of the story in a way. So we get the life and we get all of this stuff from the person that was the victim, and then we also get all this stuff from the person that committed the crime. And I found that really fascinating to read about, like both sides of the coin in a way. I don't know how to put it. You know, these things aren't always black and white, and like 1000% this crime should not have happened and it was awful, but even the person who had this done to them has in their own way forgiven the person that did this to them. And I think that was one of the most powerful things about this book, was seeing that forgiveness and seeing how remorseful this other person was for committing this crime and owning up to their mistakes and working to better themselves, because, you know, this was a huge turning point for them because they realized, wow, that was such an awful thing. I shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? And then going through trying to figure out why he did what he did, and yeah, he was owning up to it, was apologizing, trying to like make amends in a way. The victim of this crime was also the first time I had seen someone like me in a way, because we have the same like identity. Sasha, the victim here, they are agender and asexual, and I was like, hey buddy, like, let's be buds. So yeah, it was the first time I had seen someone with like two of the identities that I associate with, so that was really awesome. Sasha was also in a relationship. Again, it was kind of one of the first times I had seen someone who was asexual asexual in a relationship, and also someone who is agender being in a relationship, because at the point in my journey when I read this, I was like, oh, no one's ever gonna love me because I'm agender. Like, who could love someone like that? You know, I'm at a very different place now in my journey. Like, I'm okay. Because that sounded really upsetting, but I'm okay. This helped me get to that okay place because it showed me that things were okay, that I was okay. Yeah, the most fascinating thing is how Sasha forgave this person and Sasha's family forgave this person, and it was just a really uplifting tale. Even though Sasha went through some awful things, they were still open to accepting what happened to them and forgiving, and that is so powerful. And then like getting these points from Richard, who was the person that committed the crime, like seeing him as a person, not just a villain. So it was really fascinating, and I highly recommend, because it's just go read it. Okay, number 3, we have a book that impacted me so deeply, and I've only recently read it too. Gonna have to read off the screen because I can't remember this long title. So that is Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. The impact it had on me was immense, and that is coming from someone who is asexual, so that's probably why it affected me so much. This is such a great non-fiction about asexuality, and it helps people who don't know much about asexuality learn about this sexuality, and it also helps people who are asexual understand more about themselves, because I've known I was asexual for, I don't know, maybe going on 5 years, potentially. When I was reading this, I was like, oh yeah, I know enough about it, like it's fine, I'm not really going to get much from this. There were points that had me sobbing. Especially the one about consent, that hit so hard, because it can sometimes be different for some asexual people. Like, I'm not going to generalize here, there are definitely some asexual people that won't resonate with that chapter as much as I did. It hit so hard for me and my experience with past relationships and what consent really meant to someone who was asexual and who maybe at the time didn't realize they were asexual. And it was great. It really was great. Even though it left me feeling things, it was really good. So well written, and really helps people who are asexual or who aren't asexual understand this sexuality that is far too often ignored or treated as not queer. But I'm here to tell you, being asexual means you're queer. You are a part of the queer community. But Ace is such a well-written book as well, and like well-researched as well. I highly recommend anyone to pick it up, whether you have an interest in asexuality or not, if you are ace or not, whatever. Pick it up because it's really good for understanding this sexuality. There are some really interesting topics that are talked about in this book about sex and the impact the sex industry has on all of us and the pressures that come with that, and it's a fascinating read and I highly recommend. Okay, next up we have Queer Power, Icons, Activists and Game Changers from Across the Rainbow by Dominique. This I read recently, I randomly bought it, and it's beautiful. One of the most beautiful books I own, because it is filled with lovely art, and it's just full of all of these amazing people that are queer and have done good work for the community, whether they're celebrities or not. Just people that are doing amazing things, and it just talks about some things that they have done for the community and some of their life story. But everything is just beautiful, and there are so many people that like I haven't heard of, and like now I want to know a bunch about all of these people because they're people I hadn't heard of, and I'm really interested in it. And the art, I really love the art in this. It's so pretty. It really speaks to, I don't know, being queer, and I don't know how to describe that, but it does. So I highly recommend this for just like a quick read, a quick and fun and uplifting book while also being really educational, because it talks about icons from the past who have been the pillars of the queer community and who have fought for the queer community for decades. And it also talks about contemporaries, so people who are today leading the fight, who who are doing their own small things for the fight for queer acceptance, queer power, queer rights. It's so beneficial to have this and to learn about all these people that you might not have ever heard of. And it's also written and drawn by a queer person, which is awesome. And I can't wait for Dominic to do so many other things. Like, I'm so excited. Okay, so for the 5th queer non-fiction book, this might be a little controversial in a way. Bear with me though, okay? Bear with me. So that book is As Nature Made Him, The Boy Who Was Raised a Girl by John Colapinto. I randomly read this, and as I was reading it, I was like, oh my god, I know this story. Because this was a story that inspired a Law and Order SVU episode, and it was one of my favorite episodes. I didn't know that it was actually based on a true story. Like, sure, in the SVU version there was a lot more murder, but in the actual book a lot of the things are similar, which is kind of scary. So this is about 2 twins who at birth were going to be circumcised, but something went wrong with the first one, and instead of the parents being like, oh no, like our son, something's wrong, they were like, let's put this baby through a surgery, like a gender reassignment surgery, and we'll raise a girl. And it goes through how this kid grew up and had so many mental health issues because they didn't feel like a girl. Like they knew something was wrong and they could never figure it out. They didn't understand why they had to like be on hormones. Like they didn't know it was hormones, but they were forcibly put on hormones, and this whole thing was kept such a secret from them. Their parents could see them declining so much and did nothing. They're like, no, you're a girl, you're a girl, you're a girl. There was so much therapy that this kid was put through, not for their mental health issues, but to acclimate them into being a female. And it was awful. Like a full-on child abuse in this. Like that's what it was. And it wasn't till much later in life where this kid, now an adult, realized what had happened. They found out everything and they're like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And then they had I want to say like a sex correction surgery instead of reassignment, because then they had a surgery to turn them back into the correct gender that they wanted, that they felt on the inside. Like it doesn't make them trans, it doesn't make them particularly queer in any way, but it has those same feelings of being queer, and it's a really, really messed up situation. I do consider it queer because it deals with a lot of similar issues that queer people have to go through, of not feeling right in your own skin, not being able to understand why you don't feel right, all of the ups and downs that come with being a teenager, and then the added pressure of not feeling right in your own skin. Because this kid, when they were growing up, they were attracted to girls and they're like, oh no, am I a lesbian? Turns out no, they weren't. They were straight because they were a guy. But it was a lot of hardship that this kid had to go through because of what his parents put him through. It's a really interesting story because it really does detail the awfulness that was done to this kid and what a therapist put him through and what his parents put him through and his own story in this. And you know, you get to see all these things, and the human mind is fascinating on what certain people can convince themselves is the right thing when it's very clearly not. So interesting. And like this man is now much more at peace because he's able to live as a man, and I think he was married to a woman last I heard. You know, no longer like speaking to the family because, you know, the family abused him for his whole life. But it's a really hard-hitting story. I do recommend giving it a read. So that'll be all for my 5 Friday queer non-fiction books. Please give all of them a read. They're all amazing books, deserve so much hype, and are all on different topics of being queer, and I highly, highly recommend all of them. If you have any other queer non-fiction recommendations, leave them down below. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!